CAA Number 3 Historical Timeline by Caitlin Deckard, Abigail Cavazos, Kimberly Parton, and Joe Angel Sanchez. This timeline shows the different laws, court cases, acts, and propositions that will be covered in this video. Brown versus the Board of Education was enacted in 1954. This case started in 1952 and lasted for 2 years. Brown versus the Board of Education overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which ruled that separate education for Black and white students was equal. The decision to end separate schools for white and Black students was unanimous. This case ruled that any group of people, regardless of their race, background, or disability, could now receive equal education. These students could not be turned down. A few key points are that teachers of any race were also allowed to teach in any public school, as well as students being able to go to any public school. The implications for special education and English language learning students are that they would now be able to receive an education at any public school. Their choices were no longer limited. However, some limitations were that schools did not provide special education classes. Having special education classes was not required until later, as well as bilingual education programs. The Title VII Bilingual Education Act of 1968 noticed the needs for limited English-speaking ability students. These students are known as LESA. Implications for this act are the legislators eventually passed a bill that included children that spoke limited English, and the Bilingual Education Act led a passage for other states to adopt policies that were similar. Limitations for English learners are that help was only first applied to Spanish surnamed students. Title VII Bilingual Education Act was able to provide competitive grants to the education system and included children that speak limited English. Section 504 of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act was passed in 1973. This act prevented the discrimination against all disabled individuals in federally funded programs. Section 504 is for those individuals who do not fall into the 13 disabilities the federal government recognizes. To those defined with Section 504, they have an equal opportunity to partake in school activities and can be entitled to specific types of assistance. Section 504 does not include students with behavioral issues and does not provide additional funds to districts to carry out requirements. Blau v. Nichols was enacted in 1974. This case only lasted a little over a month. This case came to be because Chinese American students in San Francisco were placed in mainstream classes despite their lack of proficiency in English and left to sink or swim. This case provided students in California with access to language assistant programs in their native languages. Although Lau v. Nichols was only effective in California and not the whole United States, the case sparked the beginnings of the federal law called the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. This was a very important step for helping students who are English language learners. This helped other states with establishing programs as well. From this case, the Lau remedies were made. Lau remedies would go after districts that were ignoring the needs of ELLs. The Castaneda standard was formed due to the federal court case Castaneda versus Picard in 1981. The Castaneda standard was basically the law of the land at the time. Schools were tested to determine whether they were taking appropriate action to address English language learners' needs. The test was to determine if the school had a sound educational theory, sufficient resources and staff, and if they were effective in getting over language barriers. Due to the test taking time to evaluate some school programs, they slipped through, and the quality was questionable. Proposition 227 was enacted in 1998. This proposition was only in the state of California. Proposition 227 stated that limited English proficient students would be required to be in a special class that was separate from their peers and have their lessons taught in mainly English. These students could only be in class for only about a year before being mainstreamed. The limitations for this would be for the English language learners. They would not receive the right program to suit their needs, especially with the instruction being taught mostly in English and not in their native languages. Another limitation would be that they were not allowed to stay in the program for long. This would also have limitations for students with a hearing disability because they would also fall under limited English proficient categories. An implication would be that even though limited English proficient students were not given adequate assistance in learning English, they were still getting extra time to help with their needs. Proposition 203 is an alternative to bilingual education in the state of Arizona that passed in 2000 and remains in effect. Rather than being drafted and funded by the State Board of Education, Proposition 203 was created and funded by California millionaire Ron Unz, who argued that bilingual education was against immigrant students' right to learn English. Under Proposition 203, English language learners are placed in a structured English immersion program where they spend 4 hours a day separated from their English proficient peers. The proposition is commonly called the English-only law because of the absence of instruction in English language learners' native languages. This act limits the success of English learners. Studies have shown that Proposition 203 does not offer a valid measure of English language learners' English proficiency, and that the state of Arizona was forcing students out of English language learning programs and into the mainstream classroom before they had attained sufficient English proficiency. Education changed significantly when ESSA reapproved the No Child Left Behind Act and included specifications that applied to disadvantaged students and supplied extra money for assistance. Implications for English learners are that students' scores could possibly have them excluded from the yearly progress. This issued grants to improve teacher training and reading instruction. The implications listed gave NCLB extra flexibility. Special education included children that have disabilities or children that were disadvantaged. Limitations for English learners are limited to students that haven't been in the United States for less than a year and the students that must meet standards in reading and math classes. Special education accommodations are modified and must be set up according to their IEPs. No Child Left Behind was later replaced by the ESSA and was able to penalize schools that didn't improve on specific sections. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 has been revised several times to include a larger range of services. IDEA ensures free, appropriate public education, students to be in the least restrictive environment for learning, individualized education based on needs, non-discriminatory evaluation, due process if disagreements occurred, and zero reject/child find. IDEA categorized disabilities that are eligible for services and established procedures for identifying students. The Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act was passed in 2008 and went into effect on January 1, 2009. The act was passed after several Supreme Court decisions narrowly interpreted the ADA's definition of disability, causing individuals with various impairments such as cancer, diabetes, and epilepsy to be denied protection. The ADAA clarified how the definition of disability should be interpreted, which led to more extensive coverage for individuals with disabilities and more clarity in determining a student's eligibility for special education services. The amendments made to this act reinforced the right of individuals with disabilities to access to public transportation, buildings, and the workplace. Although the act does not directly deal with the education of students with special needs, and also specified that those who only meet the regarded as having a disability prong of the ADA are not entitled to reasonable accommodations, the ADAA added ADHD to the list of disorders and writing to the list of major life activities, as well as clarified the inclusion of individuals with disabilities or impairments that are either in remission or episodic, such as cancer or epilepsy. The Every Student Succeeds Act, known as ESSA, has several great qualities and has improved the education system. This law supports standards and testing demands of No Child Left Behind and provides flexibility for school programs. Implications for English learners or Title I helped students receive high-quality education and ended educational gaps. The ESSA demands annual state assessments to be challenging. State assessments are aligned with the college readiness standards. Special education for ESSA helps balance equal opportunities for students with disabilities. Limitations for English language learners are that services aren't implemented for students that have been in the United States for less than a year, and students are required to meet state standards in reading and math.